My struggle to save my younger brother. At the age of 13, I had to take over the care of my younger brother when our mother abandoned the family. Years later, when we became adults, we had to face new challenges. My little brother fell into bad company, and now I don't know how to save him. My name is Emily, and I was born in a tiny town in Iowa, where the streets were always deserted and people knew each other so well that they could predict who had wronged whom the previous week. Our life seemed simple and peaceful until one day it was turned upside down. It all started when I was only 13 years old. That day my mom, without warning, packed up her things and left home for good. She left us alone without saying a word, not a goodbye or I'm sorry. I remember standing at our small bedroom window and watching her get into her car and drive away, leaving only puffs of dust behind her. In that second, I felt the weight of responsibility fall on my fragile shoulders. My little brother Jack was just a baby. He was barely 5. He was so small that sometimes I thought he didn't realize how difficult our situation was. But I realized that I was responsible for him now. Dad was rarely home. He spent his days at work, returning late at night, tired and irritable. When he entered the house, his footsteps echoed in our hearts, reminding us that we were alone. Jack and I spent entire days alone together. I cooked meals, trying to remember the recipes my mother had shown me when she was still with us. Every night I'd stand at the stove, mixing ingredients I found in the fridge, praying to myself that dinner would be at least somewhat edible. Then I washed our clothes by hand, because the washing machine had broken a long time ago and there was no money for repairs. I ironed my father's shirts, trying to make them as neat as they used to be when my mother still lived with us. Jack was my only comfort during those hard times. I read him books before bed, telling him stories I made up as I went along to distract him from reality. I made sure he did his homework, even though I could barely keep up with my own schoolwork. I lay in bed at night, listening to him sniffle quietly next to me, thinking about how much I wished it could go back to when we were a normal family. Every day was a struggle. A struggle to survive, to keep my family together, to make sure Jack grew up to be a happy man. I knew I had to be strong for him, but sometimes I felt like my strength was leaving me. Sometimes I cried into my pillow when no one was watching, wondering why I was the one bearing such a burden. But every time I looked at my little brother, I found the strength to go on. As Jack got older, things started to change. I noticed that he began to drift away from me, spending more and more time away from home. At first I thought it was normal for teenagers to find their place in the world, but I soon realized it was more than that. His new friends. They were strange. Always dressed in black, with cold eyes and cynical smirks. They looked much older than their years, as if they had lived a lifetime of dark secrets. I'd never seen their parents, never heard where they came from. They seemed to come out of nowhere, like shadows that suddenly started following Jack. At first I tried to convince myself that everything was going to be okay. Maybe it was just a phase that many teenagers go through. But the longer it went on, the more anxious I felt. Jack had become different. His eyes, which used to glow with joy and curiosity, were now empty and indifferent. He rarely smiled, and when he did, his smile seemed strained and fake. Our conversations became shorter and less frequent. He would leave early in the morning and return late at night, avoiding my questions about where he had been and with whom. I tried to talk to him, to ask him what was going on. But whenever I brought it up, he waved it off, saying everything was under control. He assured me that he knew what he was doing and that I shouldn't worry. But I could see that wasn't true. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable. He stopped going to school, citing that he no longer needed to study. Instead, he brought home money that I was afraid to imagine. It would appear unexpectedly, in large amounts, and Jack would hide it in his room without explaining where it came from. I began to notice changes in his appearance. He had lost weight, his skin was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Sometimes I caught him looking in the mirror for too long, as if checking to see if he was okay. One day I found a bag of white powder in his room. My heart sank. I knew right away it was drugs. But when I asked him about it, he just laughed and said it wasn't what I thought it was. I wanted to believe him, but I knew it was a lie. Every night I lay in bed listening to the sounds in the house. Sometimes I could hear him stirring in his room, the floorboards creaking under his feet. I imagined him sitting in the dark, thinking about something I couldn't understand. Fear clutched my chest, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was losing him, but I couldn't stop it. That night I slept restlessly as usual. My thoughts swirled around Jack, his new friends, and where our life was going. I woke up every half hour, listened to the silence, and closed my eyes again, hoping sleep would bring some relief. But suddenly there was a sharp, insistent knock on the door. It was so loud that it pierced the silence of the night, making me jump out of bed. My heart beat faster as I walked to the door. I opened it, and two uniformed police officers stood in front of me. Their faces were serious and their gazes were cold. One of them asked, "Are you Emily Smith?" "Yes," I answered in a shaky voice, feeling fear begin to slowly rise inside me. "Your name is listed as the contact person for Jack Smith. Your brother is under arrest for possession of drug paraphernalia," the cop said, looking me straight in the eye. The world spun around me. All I heard was the word "arrested." It sounded like a sentence. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Images of Jack, my little brother, the one I'd promised to protect, flashed before my eyes. How could he be in this situation? How had I let it happen? The cops kept talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. Emotions raged inside me, fear, guilt, anger. I remembered all the conversations we'd had, all the attempts to keep him on the right path. Why couldn't I have prevented this? Why hadn't I seen him go farther and farther away? I wanted to scream, to cry, to run somewhere to hide from this terrible truth. But instead I stood still, paralyzed. The policeman left, leaving me alone with this horrifying knowledge. I went back to my room, sat on my bed, and covered my face with my hands. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I couldn't stop them. My mind was spinning with questions. How did this happen? Why couldn't I save him? After Jack's arrest, our lives became a nightmare. He spent months in jail, and those months dragged on and on. Every morning I woke up thinking about him, imagining what it would be like for him there, among strangers, in a cage, deprived of his freedom. I went to meetings with a lawyer, collected documents, did everything I could to help him, but the feeling of helplessness never left me. One day, when I didn't expect it at all, our father's body was found at work. It turned out he'd had a heart attack, but no one was around. It all came over me like a snowball. Even though we had never been close to my father, he was still a member of our family. In a hurry, I organized a funeral, but not many people came. Finally, the day came when my brother was released. I waited for him at the prison door, hoping he would come back as the same Jack, the same boy I knew and loved. But when he came out, I hardly recognized him. His eyes were empty and his gaze was cold and aloof. He walked toward me slowly, as if every movement was difficult for him. When he finally approached, I tried to hug him, but he pushed me away without a word. When he came home, he hardly spoke to me. His room became his fortress, where he locked himself in for long hours, refusing to leave. If I tried to talk to him, he either ignored me or responded with one-word phrases full of anger and irritation. Sometimes he would explode, yelling at me for no reason, blaming me for everything that had happened. I didn't recognize him. My sweet, kind brother had turned into a stranger, full of anger and pain. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that maybe he would have been better off staying where he was at least supervised. Where he couldn't hurt himself or anyone else. But then I remembered how he used to be, and hope flared up in my soul again. I kept trying to reach out to him, but each time I ran into a blank wall. The nights became a real ordeal for me. Lying in bed, I listened to him wandering around the house, to the creak of his footsteps on the floor. Sometimes I heard him whisper something to himself, but I couldn't make out the words. Those nights were filled with fear and uncertainty. I didn't know what tomorrow held, and each new day brought only new challenges. I desperately searched for a job to provide for both of us. I sent out resumes, went on interviews, took any part-time job I could find. But nothing seemed to fit. Our town was small, opportunities were few, and competition was high. Money was running out, and I started to panic. We were living on the edge of survival, and every day became a struggle for existence. Then I made a decision that changed our whole life. I decided that we needed to get out of here, start over. A big city like Chicago promised a better chance of success. There would be opportunities there that I'd never dreamed of here. We sold what we could, collected the rest of the money, and hit the road. The first weeks in Chicago were a blur. We found a cheap apartment in a neighborhood where the rent was lower, but the safety left a lot to be desired. However, I tried to ignore the dangers around me. The main thing was that we were together, and we had a chance to start over. Working as a waitress in a small cafe was hard but stable. I got up early in the morning, came back late at night, my legs hurt, my back ached, but I held on. Jack had found a job as a courier, too. At first glance, things seemed to be going well. We started to get used to the new rhythm of life, and I let myself hope that maybe things would get better. But soon things started to go wrong. Jack started disappearing again for days at a time, coming home late at night. I noticed that he started hanging out with new people who made me uneasy. They looked suspicious, behaved strangely, and I felt they were pulling him back into the same dangerous environment we were trying to escape from. One day I came home after my shift and found Jack hadn't returned. I called him all evening, but his phone was off. Finally, around midnight, he showed up, drunk and aggressive. He was barely on his feet, swearing and throwing things. I tried to calm him down, but he only yelled at me, blaming me for all his problems. That was the moment I realized things weren't going the way they should. We ran away from the same town, but the problems followed us. Now I didn't know what to do. How do I stop this flood of negativity? How do I get Jack back to normal? But more importantly, how do I keep my faith that things can still be fixed? Now I'm standing on the edge of a precipice, not knowing where to go next. Jack continues to drift away, and every day that distance between us grows wider. I can see him sinking into the darkness, and I can't do anything to get him out of there. Every time I try to talk to him, he either ignores me or responds with rudeness. His laughter sounds in my ears like a mockery of all my efforts. Sometimes I wonder what I did wrong. Maybe if I had been a better sister, things could have turned out differently. If I had paid more attention to him, if I had been stricter or gentler. At times like these, doubts gnaw at me from the inside and I feel utterly helpless. There are days when I want to drop everything, to get away from these problems, to forget about everything. But then I remember that Jack is the only thing I have left. He's my brother, my family, and I can't leave him alone. Let the world around us crumble, let our hopes melt away, I will not give up. Because no matter what, I love him. And I'm willing to fight for him to the end. Family is the most important thing we have. And even though things look bleak right now, I'm not gonna let this ruin us. I will stand by him, support him, even if he doesn't want me to. Even if I have to go through hell, I'll do it for him. For us.